Hi, everybody. Welcome to the July 24th, 2015 edition of Colorado Inside Out. I'm your host, Dominic Dezzutti. Thank you very much for joining us. Let's get a quick take on outgoing Denver Auditor Dennis Gallagher using his final days in office to criticize a number of issues, including the Department of Human Services for failing to cooperate with auditors and a potential I-70 project. Patty Cahoon from Westward, we certainly didn't count on Auditor Gallagher going quietly into that good night. He went out with a fire, which is indicative of what his career has been like. What did you think of his parting shots? Well, they were vintage, and I loved it because they arrived exactly as the new people were being inaugurated. And I was also very grateful for them because I was one of the roasters of Gallagher on Tuesday night, and it gave me several laugh lines. So great public servant, 44 years in office. He'll be really missed around this city. Todd Shepard, editor of CompleteColorado.com. Thanks for joining us.
You bet.
Gallagher has really, I think, raised the profile of the auditor in Denver. We've had a lot of great auditors over the city's generations, but Auditor Gallagher really put a focus on some important issues. Do you think the next auditor, Tim O'Brien's, up to the task, and do you think there will be still some things to clean up from what Gallagher has pointed out?
Things to clean up, certainly. Can he live up to Gallagher's big shoes? That's a really tall task for anyone. I would say that just in terms of doing a quick take, 2015 now, and this report by Gallagher becomes the capstone, but 2015 really now becomes a conservative watershed moment in Denver's history with the loss of Gallagher, the loss of Charlie Brown, and the loss of Jeannie Fotz. Those three conservatives have really been a bulwark against a lot of policies in Denver, and we're about 5 years now from Denver being completely like Boulder and endorsing kooky things like let's being Kyoto Protocol compliant by the year 2020. Sorry.
Eric Sondman, political analyst. Gallagher led us with something to talk about. His parting gift to Colorado Inside Out, probably to other people too. What did you think?
Well, first of all, I think Todd Shepard can expect a libel action from Dennis Gallagher for calling him conservative. I think he'll take offense to that. I'm going to have a slightly different take on this one than Patty. Yes, I think it was vintage Gallagher, how he exited office, but I also think it was a little bit bad form. I'm not suggesting the issues didn't deserve to be highlighted, but you need to know when to say goodbye. This was not as bad as Bill Clinton leaving office with a whole bunch of questionable pardons, but I'll have a different take here. I don't think Dennis Gallagher in his final few weeks in office necessarily that those were the highlights of his career or that he covered himself in glory. The statement he put out the day after the election where even though he had endorsed Chris Nevitt and then he just went off on Chris Nevitt's campaign and what a lousy campaign it had been. Well, as best I could see, the centerpiece of the Nevitt campaign was the Gallagher endorsement of Nevitt. And obviously what he was trying to do in that instance was protect some of his people to see if they could hold their jobs. I don't think this was the world's greatest forum.
Natasha Gardner, senior editor of 5280 magazine, wrap it up for us.
I think Dennis Gallagher did an interesting thing in making the city auditor position almost like a journalist where you have must-read people, that bylines that you have to hear what they're saying. He became that with the auditor. What'll be interesting is if Tim O'Brien can pick up that momentum. Now, Gallagher has kind of forced him into it, particularly by not signing the agreement related to the widening of I-70. He's forced Tim O'Brien to, almost the first moment on the job, weigh in on that concept, and it doesn't take too much scratching on the surface of that particular topic to start to find problems. This is not the last we'll hear of I-70, and Gallagher ensured that that's going to be the case.
Mayor Michael Hancock delivered his inauguration speech on Monday. Among the issues discussed were his plans to invest $15 million per year in affordable housing, job creation to help millennials moving to the city, and expanding access to alternative transportation. Patty, as we all know, inauguration speeches are built for things like this, grand plans and millions of dollars. But in this one's a little bit different because as mayor, Mayor Hancock has a lot of power. I mean, not all of these he can just do with the wave of magic wand, but he can get a lot of things done. Do you think this really spells out what he wants to do, or was just speech making?
I think both. I mean, He wants to do it. Who can live in the city and not want to do something to get affordable housing in, so you can at least have the lowest level have some access to housing? I'd like to see the middle class have some access to housing, because that is disappearing too, and affordable housing is not going to help them. There are two different things that can put the brakes on some of these plans. One is voters, and come November, we're going to have votes on the DIA, the development out by DIA plan, and working with Adams County. We're going to have votes on the stock show. We may have votes on this college plan. And I don't know about you, but I feel an incredible discontent around town. People are mad that it's growing so fast without seeming to have any breaks or any oversight. I was talking to someone last night who is one of those people who's grown a business from the ground up, is hiring all those millennials. And he said, I don't mind it taking 3 times as long to get where I'm going in Denver, but I mind that I'm going over potholes while I'm doing it. And we've got a lot of infrastructure and issues we have to have fixed. So I think people are going to be really paying a close eye on that. And they may be they may be telling the mayor some things when they go vote in November.
That's a good point. Todd, do you think Mayor Hancock has the political capital to get some of these things done? I mean, while as of city government says it's a strong mayor government, he has the right to do things, but does he have the political capital to get these things done?
On some of the smaller items that were brought up in that speech, definitely, but when it comes to that centerpiece item of the affordable housing, that's where it'll really come down to the details. I think the Denver Post had a really even-handed approach to it in an editorial that they brought up, where they said a lot of these little taxes are starting to add up now for residents. And you try to keep this balance. There are two kinds of tax balances you try to keep. One is the balance between what the government's taking from the citizenry, but also then you look at the balance at the way government distributes the whole pie that they have, and you don't want that to get out of balance. Affordable housing can be very tricky. I think it was a State of the City address just in 2013 when the mayor declared the previous affordable housing initiative a total bust. In Loveland, it's been a struggle there as well. And the problem is, a lot of times, if the affordable housing is an actual purchase situation, those people then can't resell with any gained equity, so they don't really gain anything. If it's an apartment situation, a lot of times you end up creating just sort of projects by some other name. So affordable housing is really tricky. I'd urge the city of Denver to go back to the legislature, keep working on a construction defects bill that maybe is just centered on Denver. That's not a statewide fix. That gives the city some flexibility to try some really creative things with the insurance industry.
Eric, it's an interesting approach that Todd brings up. Do you think Mayor Hancock's up for that creativity, I guess, to approach this kind of problem?
We'll see about that. I think Patty was dead on here. I mean, there's a long track record in Denver of tax increases passing. John Hickenlooper as mayor had the golden touch with it. I've commented around this table in years gone by that Denver is so liberal. I think there's an attitude that the more you tax yourself, the closer to God you are. I think we're going to test that theory here over the next couple of years, if not this November, then in some succeeding Novembers. The mayor has a very ambitious agenda, starting with the stock show, which is not a small ticket item. There's the DIA issue on the ballot, which doesn't have a tax attached to it, but it's still a $10 million check that they're proposing that the taxpayers of Denver write. And now this scholarship program, which has a lot of merits, but as Todd pointed out, the Denver Post editorial, I thought that was right on the mark in terms of what is the cumulative impact here. Individually, a lot of these things make sense. What's the cumulative impact? And if you get by 2015, then in 2016, Denver Public Schools is probably teed up for a tax issue. The SCFD is going back to the voters. There's a long line, year after year. There's a long queue of these tax proposals. And voters strike me, as Patty articulated, in a cranky mood right now. We saw that in the municipal elections with what happened in the auditor's race, with a number of city council races, and I think Michael Hancock was benefited by not having any opponent in that race. Voters are in a cranky mood, and we'll see if their appetite for taxes is truly limitless.
Natasha, do you think Mayor Hancock's going to have to pick some priorities? And there's some, as Eric rattled them off, there's some pretty big ticket items. Any one of them a good heavy lift. If you have 2 or 3 more of those, at some point you have to kind of pick and choose. What do you think?
Well, I think that's one thing that distinguished this speech from some of his previous State of the City speeches, because the grand plans weren't weren't there as much as they have been in the past, and that's because he has so many balls in the air right now. And some of those are coming to fruition, and we're seeing development, we're seeing things change around the city. But with so much up in the air, I think people are still having that question of, okay, well, what about my potholes? What about things that are going around in my neighborhood? And in fact, one of the most poignant moments of his speech that got the most applause, or some of the most applause, was when he talked about fixing the traffic light timing on Colorado, which is such a simple thing. And it was, for me, just a moment of, well, that's your mood, Mr. Mayor. That's what people in the city care about right now. So even as he's thinking about these big picture things, the type of things that might have a name on it, let's also focus on the small things that would really impact daily people's lives.
The mayor careers are riddled with that. You have Mayor Nichols really losing his job from snowplows, nothing about a building. And I still remember John Hickenlooper's most brilliant campaign at being at parking meters. People respond to what's going to impact their everyday life. It's a good point. Reporters from Newsweek were banned from covering the remainder of the Aurora Theater Trial this week. Judge Carlos Zamora said the publication should have known better after tweeting the name of one of the jurors online after the guilty verdict. Todd, you are an investigative journalist by trade. You know all these rules. You're very good at it, but this seemed like journalism 101. Are you amazed at the screw up?
Yeah, when my Twitter feed was overloaded with it in a short time, 5 minutes, it really was surprising. You expected it maybe from someone like a TMZ that maybe had descended in hoping to scoop up something scandalous. But I would say I think that this puts George Brockler's errant tweet into remarkable perspective. And now the Democrats are trying to get this, they're trying to get traction by making taking that issue to is it the bar that they're making the complaint to? So that puts that tweet into perspective. Overall, though, I would say Judge Carlos Zamora is really to be praised for the overall trial, the remarkable efficiency he has shown, and allowing the single camera in the courtroom. I think he set up a model for these high-profile trials that will be followed by judges all across the country, quite frankly.
Eric, I got to say my first gut reaction was A, hey, Newsweek still exists. But two, what, did I steal your idea?
You stole my line.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. But the error just seems outrageous at this stage of the game. Maybe folks who aren't interested or knowledgeable about all the different intricacies of laws and regarding the media, that seems pretty darn basic. But what was your reaction?
I don't have
I'm
a
so
lot to add.
sorry.
You took my line. I worked so hard on that now. But to your point, I agree. To Todd's point, yeah, this is journalism 101. I mean, there's, occasionally there are gray lines, but sometimes the lines are just black and white, what you do and what you don't do. And this one was completely a non-starter. I agree with Todd. I think this judge, I haven't followed the trial day by day, but from a macro level, this judge is on top of it. He's handling it. He runs the courtroom without coming across in a terribly autocratic way. This is a judge that, or a case, a very high-profile case that I think you could study for courtroom management, and so kudos to him. The hard work is what just started this week, the sentencing phase, where it's going to get even much more emotional, I believe, than the guilt phase that we just finished. So I think this next month we're in for a lot of emotional heartbreak in that courtroom. I continue to ask the question of for what, but others have decided that, and others will decide it.
Eric, that's a great point. I mean, Natasha, you've covered issues like this very well the last many years, but I think when we looked at the guilty phase, the verdict phase, the initial one, the community as a whole were pretty generally agreed. Everyone said he's guilty. They can see these plans. If I was in the jury, I'd feel this way. You see a community really unified. Now we get into a phase where the community is not nearly as unified. Folks, not want to deal with it. Folks that are against the death penalty. Folks that definitely want to see him have a capital sentence. Folks that think, well, it's not going to happen for 30 years anyway, so who cares? Does that lack of community agreement, do you think we're going to see some of the problems, and not really problems with that, but ramifications of that over this penalty phase?
Absolutely, and especially with the case that's happening with Dexter Lewis in Denver as well. This conversation is not just about what happened to Aurora, but it's become as multifaceted as death penalty conversations can be. I think what's interesting for me, and something that I'm still waiting for, is when Governor Hickenlooper made the decision to stall or delay Nathan Dunlap's execution, there was a call for some public discourse on the concept of death penalty. That hasn't really happened, at least not in a governmental way or a really proactive, let's have community conversations. What's happened instead is now it's happening at our dining room tables. People are having to have this conversation in their homes and at their workplaces because of the Aurora case and because of the Denver case. And yes, it's as complicated as it always is. Do the drugs work? Is our legal system efficient? Is this the appropriate response? What do we do with this type of person? Those are happening in a very informal way, and I would really love the state of Colorado to have them in a more formal way, because I do think the voters are going to have to deal with this issue sometime in the near future.
Patty, the week really gave us the spectrum. You had a silly, almost, you wouldn't even expect this from a college newspaper kind of error from Newsweek. And then you have a really serious penalty phase starting. Take your pick.
Well, I was amazed that if you've ever tweeted, you have to count so carefully. How do you not notice you've got that name in there? You know, you're getting rid of the if you can. You're not going to put in a name that is forbidden. You don't even need to have taken a journalism 101 class. The judge has basically been giving the rules and reminding you, you do not out the jurors in a case like this. So it was an inexcusable error, and there's just no way to excuse it. Natasha's right. What we're going to soon have is a death penalty discussion, especially if they decide to put him to death, because what we're going to hear is endless fights, how much it's going to cost to fight it, what the flaws are in the death penalty. Why didn't we just lock him up and avoid the whole trial? Because we will essentially be going through the trial again for the next 20 years, if indeed that's what happens. That's why Nathan Dunlap still hasn't, it's been 20 years for him and he is still there. We're also going to begin to hear the effect of, did this coverage have an effect on the recent theater shooting? So the topics keep going on, serious topics. Mm-hmm.
Colorado's VA hospital is under fire this week as they continue to cancel non-emergency surgeries due to inability to properly sterilize equipment. I swear to you, this is not a story from the Civil War. Spokesman Dan Warvey stated the operating rooms are still functioning in a limited capacity while equipment is being sent to and from Cheyenne to be cleaned. I wish I was making this topic up. Eric, I read this and I at first thought it was an Onion joke, and then I remembered that this isn't the one that's to be built. This isn't the VA hospital that we've been talking about for months on this show. That's the construction kerfuffle. This is the current hospital supposed to be helping that this community would consider the number one folks that should be helped, which is the heroes, the veterans of our country, and that we can't get materials for surgery cleaned. I'm sorry, I'm just beside myself. Your thoughts?
Keep going, Dominic. You're saying it well. I didn't realize we were already at Disgrace of the Week, but this could very well be it. It is mind-boggling. It is truly mind-boggling. As someone who just saw the inside of an operating room a few weeks ago, I have a new knee not that many weeks ago, you take some things for granted. And in 2015, you ought to be able to take a few things for granted when you go into the hospital, starting with the surgical equipment is sterilized. Your Civil War analogy is right on the mark. What do they have in Cheyenne that we don't have here? I mean, I just don't get it. The real issue here, let me turn serious for a second, is there is no population who deserves first class, the highest standard of care more than this population. And there's no population that is probably receiving less of it or where it is more compromised than what we're seeing here. I read at the same time this article was out, there's an article about the VA hospital in Detroit, which truly sounds like, they don't have a Cheyenne to turn to. It sounds like you're doing business or practicing medicine in some third world outpost. I continue to ask the question, why is this a captive system? why not let these people have the best operating rooms and the cleanest, most sterile operating rooms in any other hospital in Denver through some kind of voucher or whatever payment mechanism you want to come up with. I think the days of the VA being a captive system are winding down.
Natasha, Civil War jokes aside, when you look at the VA hospital and the issues, besides the building itself is an epic disaster. But you see stories like this. At one point, does somebody take this as some sort of populist bat and say, we can make some difference with this politically? I mean, they really use this as an issue to beat the heck out of whoever's in charge with it right now.
Well, absolutely, someone should be doing that. But I will take up that bat, not in a political manner, but I will say, why don't the vets who are getting rescheduled right now come to the public in Colorado and say, start a GoFundMe page and say, please don't make me go to the VA.
Yeah.
So could we get public support to get these people the surgeries that they need? I mean, obviously the government's not stepping up. I did look at something. The Center for Investigative Reporting did a report that looked at the backlog for VA hospitals in the last week. It came out, but they said that we are now back down to approximately the level we were when Obama took office, which is great because we had a massive backlog that came up during that time. So we've made some progress, but that's not enough. We need to do so much more. So if the government can't do it at this point, I think it's public citizens that have to step forward and say, all right, what do you need for your surgery? We can make this happen.
Patty, what do you think? A GoFundMe page for these folks? Because the help doesn't seem to be coming from anywhere else.
Or maybe just going to Donald Trump, who could spend a lot more time talking about how to really help the VA veterans and the VA hospitals, how to get them organized. Why doesn't he just take this on instead of beating up John McCain? I would also like to say, if they are taking instruments to Cheyenne, I hope they are not trying to sterilize them in alcohol, because having just been to Cheyenne Frontier Days, there is none left up there.
Todd, wrap it up for us.
Harry S. Truman first gained a foothold on the national consciousness when he started his Truman Committee, where he drove coast to coast to uncover waste and fraud in the Army system and the places where bombs and airplanes were being manufactured. This country needs a Truman Committee for the VA. If you go all the way back to the 2007 Walter Reed scandal, basically we've had nothing but a decade of scandals that not only deal with the care issue, as Eric brought up, but that deal with the capital projects, as we're seeing in Aurora. It's time for something serious to be formed to tackle all of the problems and make serious reforms.
Well, it may look like we have already started it. It's now time to start our favorite part of the show, Disgrace of the Week, as always. Patty, start us off.
Well, it was ironic on Monday morning when you have all the stories about the inauguration, a big time in Denver, no matter how you feel about the direction Denver's going in. And you suddenly wake up with a very diminished Denver Post. Monday was the deadline for people to say whether or not they were going to take the latest buyout. And we are losing some of the best bylines in this city. Not just Lynn Bartles, but Joanne Davidson, one of the hardest working people in town. Mark Jaffe, really good. Steve Robbie, really good reporters. A lot of the institutional memory, not just for the Denver Post, but for this city. And it is definitely a lesser city without them.
Todd.
For a city that's so obviously involved in our physical life and our outdoor life, the disgrace goes to this shuttle company that overslept their alarm and couldn't get their shuttle buses out to save those 700 half marathoners and just left them abandoned. Was it at the finish line? Anyways, a disgrace and a black eye when our outdoor life is part of what brings in the tourism to this state.
Eric.
I was going to go with Donald Trump, but that is so obvious, and Patty already covered it. Since we went after Newsweek, the institution that apparently is still around, let me also talk about Gawker. I think Gawker set a new low this week in trying to out a private citizen. There was no issue there of hypocrisy in terms of his public life versus perhaps his private life. There was no reason to try to out this person. Gawker is sort of the low level of journalism these days, and
Natasha.
So I'll go back to the theater shooting in Louisiana. There's a website that's tracking this. It says, well, yesterday was 204 days into the year, and there's been 204 mass shootings this year as well. We've gone way beyond the point where we can say that guns aren't something that need to be really thoughtfully approached in this country. It needs to happen.
Trying to see something nice about somebody, Patty?
Well, Dennis Gallagher and the 7 council members who all left this week, whether you agreed with everything they did or not, they certainly worked hard for Denver. we're going to miss them. We'll miss their institutional memory too. So losing those Post reporters, losing some of those council members, it's a different town we're waking up in right now.
You're here.
And I'll take Patty's disgrace and just sort of turn it on its head in that you just have to wish the best of luck and say a small prayer to those 22 journalists. I think it's 22 was the last number I heard that are taking the buyout. Change is always difficult. Now that Lynn has snapped up the SOS job and an old colleague of mine, Roger Hudson, just took the AG's job, it's not as though there's just a ton of spokesperson jobs out there in the market. It's going to be a rough transition for these people, and we wish them the best.
Eric.
I'm not going to be original here. I'm going to go ditto on Patty's disgrace, on Todd's comments here. To all of those journalists, we wish them well. They have done very well by the journalistic profession in this city. In particular, kudos. I wasn't here last week, but particular kudos to Lynn Bartles, who is truly an original. Somebody, there are not that many people that you say we won't see their likes again, but we won't see a political reporter like Lynn again, and we'll miss her at this table as well.
You're here. Natasha.
At the inauguration, there was a young woman who sang the national anthem and was amazing, and the Denver Youth Poet Laureate was amazing as well. If those two women are a sense of where this city is going, it's a good start.
And I will add to the Say Something Nice with Somebody to echo that what we said here about Lynn Bartles and all the great journalists who are losing the Post, but especially Lynn. She's been a friend of the station, a friend of mine, a friend of this table. I don't think Colorado politics will ever be the same without her institutional knowledge and her coverage of it. So we wish her the absolute best, and I'm looking very forward to that first Secretary of State's office. If they even have press conferences, that's really going to be something to watch. That is all the time we had tonight, so thanks for tuning in. Before we go, we wanted to clarify an error we made a couple of weeks ago. When we talked about the potential recall election in Jeffco, we discussed the cost to taxpayers, but a viewer kindly informed us that an unrelated vote is already scheduled to be held, so a recall election, if it were to happen, would not be a special cost to taxpayers. So we always enjoy hearing from our viewers, and we appreciate the clarification. Remember that you can catch any part of the show or CIO Postgame, our special web exclusive segment, online, and be sure to check out the CIO podcast on iTunes. For everyone here at Channel 12, I'm Dominic Dezzutti. Thank you very much for watching. Good night.
My name is Sarah Newberry, and I am the floor director here for Colorado Inside Out and Colorado Public 12. And what I mainly do is I am the go-between the control room and the talent. So I am listening in on my headset, and they are giving me direction on when to tell the talent to stand by, whether or not I need them to read through their script, whether or not they need to look at a certain camera. They tell me, and then I will go ahead and relay that onto the talent.
Here we go. Studio, are you ready?
Yes, sir. We're ready on the floor. So one of the responsibilities of the floor director is making sure everything on the floor is in its place and ready to go for the television show that we're going to tape. So that includes making sure set pieces are correctly placed on the floor, lighting is in the correct place, and shooting the correct places. Set pieces, which tables and chairs, they are in not only in alignment with the camera, but in alignment with the set pieces behind them. Another one of the things I like to do, and it is part of the floor director's job, is to make sure all of the talent is properly mic'd and ready to go, what we call camera ready. So if they need a little makeup, they have water available to take a sip, they have the correct script in front of them, and they're seated in the correct chair. Another one of the things that we want to do is we want to make sure everyone is looking good for television. My motto is if they don't look good, I don't look good. And my name's on the credits, so I want to make sure everybody on set is looking their best. So I make sure everybody's hair is set in case they have a couple of flyaways, get those down. Everyone has a tendency to look a little shiny on TV, so we always have a little bit of powder, and I have it marked for this is my lightest powder. So just have a little powder handy, knock down some of the shine, and just make sure overall that everybody looks and feels their best so that they can present themselves great on TV, which makes for a great story, which makes for a great show. So that when the all-important time comes and the director is in my ear saying,
Floor director ready for mic and cue.
stand by, we're going to start in 5, 4, 3, and I get them going. So I'll see you on the next episode of Colorado Inside Out.
I have no idea. Why do elephants paint their toenails red?
To hide in cherry trees. No, wait, no, I know it. Okay. No, wait. Have you ever seen an elephant in a cherry tree?
I have not.
Apparently it's because you never see one.
Welcome to the July 24th edition of Colorado Inside Out Postgame, a special web-exclusive production here on Channel 12. Let's get a quick take on a pro-police rally held last weekend that quickly turned into a clash of ideas as anti-police protesters swarmed the event with signs and bullhorns. Meanwhile, Denver Police Chief Robert White announced a major reorganization of the leadership this week, including the demotion of 2 commanders. Patty Cahoon from Westward. Lots of stuff here. I mean, I can understand where the pro-police supporters were coming from, but I guess it seemed natural that the anti-police protesters were going to show up. Were you surprised? Were you surprised by the big moves by Chief White?
No, actually, none of it was surprising. I guess what I'm pleasantly surprised by is that Denver doesn't have the level of animosity and trouble that some cities do. That's good news. But we still have a lot of work to do in the manager of safety's office. Of course, we're still looking at the sheriff's department where we need a new head, where the bad stories still keep coming. That's a top priority. Chief White seems to have done several reorganizations, and it doesn't seem to have smoothed things over, but at least they're out in the community. They're talking to people more. That's good. But the police department has a long way to go, I think, to really repair the situation with the community. And the fact is, whenever there's a protest, there's going to be a counter-protest in this town. It doesn't matter what it is. The only department in that group right now, the Denver Fire Department, seems to be doing very well. Tragic loss recently of one of its members, but they're taking on other areas like Englewood, Glendale. They are now providing support for those cities, and seemingly without any problems.
Mm-hmm. Todd Shepard, editor of CompleteColorado.com. Patty brought up a very good point about that Denver's been lucky about not having more problems with police issues. And hopefully we'll continue that great fortune. But is Chief White making the right moves to keep that fortune, I guess, around?
I've been anticipating that question. I've been thinking a lot about it in the last couple of days, and it's really hard for any citizen to have a grasp on a police department that size. What's really needed here, as we talked about in the first show, is here we're losing all these post reporters. What's really needed is that beat reporter that can really stick around city council persons' offices because they're the ones that are going to get that first level of feedback. Other than that, Patty talked about there's a long way to go to rebuild that trust. I think right now it starts with getting this body camera thing working. I mean, you're going to go out and get these grants and get these body cameras, and then they're only in use 25% of the time. That's the sort of miscommunication that the Denver Police Department has engaged in for so long that they've developed this bad reputation. I think the bad reputation, quite honestly, just carries over from the burglary scandal of the late 60s, and people just love to talk about it and sort of, berate them as a joke. And unfortunately for them, it's stuck around all these years, and they have to go above and beyond to repair that relationship, not just put forth an average effort.
Eric Sonnen, political analyst. The rally aside, I mean, at least hopefully maybe that can just be considered a healthy way of a city venting its anger one way or the other, pro or anti. But what do you think of Chief White? Are the moves the right direction? Will Mayor Hancock have to see more moves happen?
To Todd's point, we don't know if they're the right moves. I'm going to give the chief the benefit of the doubt that he knows his team, he knows their capabilities, but you don't know what you don't know. And you don't know until down the road whether this is going to improve performance or not. Both Patty and Todd referenced that Denver is not, fortunately, knock on wood, we're not Ferguson, we're not Baltimore, we're not Staten Island, not a lot of places where really hellacious incidents have gone down over recent history. But by the same token, Denver has had, or if you dial the clock back over the last 5 to 6 to 10 years, a number of rather controversial instances, episodes of our own. So, we're not somehow exempt from all of this, and you're only one bad evening or one bad afternoon away from those kinds of international headlines. You would love to take the protesters, and Patty's right, any rally or any protest in this day and age is always going to incur a counter-protest. But you would love to try to get them in a room and see if there was any kind of common ground that could be forged. The answer is probably not. They're talking past each other. Neither side, and I saw some of the video of those rallies, I don't think either side is going to be terribly known for their nuance or their perspective or their perspective here. But it's a free country, and anyone can go and carry whatever placard they want.
Natasha Gardner, senior editor from 5280 magazine. Eric brings up a good point, because it was only a couple years ago, before we were beating up the sheriff's department for story after story after story, it was the police department giving us story after story, and that's also the reason why we have Chief White now, who came in and tried to clean things up. How is that cleaning going, and does it need to have a refreshed focus?
I think that the police system needs to evolve at the same rate, or perhaps even faster than our society. So it constantly needs to be tinkered with. So having White reorganize the department, or doing a shakeup, as this has been termed, I think is only a good thing for a department that is known for being very entrenched in their ways. I've actually been working on a story for the magazine that'll be in an upcoming issue about the police, and so I've been spending a lot of time with their documents. When I looked at the list, and it's a long list of people who've been reassigned, what I found most interesting is that many of those reassignments relate to internal affairs, both people moving out and people coming in. Now, when he took over, White also took a strong focus on that department and made some major changes there. So he's doing it again. I think that's an interesting sort of statement of saying we're going to continue reevaluating a department, but we're going to continue reevaluating the part of our department that specifically looks at how we behave and how we police ourselves. So I don't think that I think that's just the start of what we're going to be hearing out of that department. This internal affairs shakeup is perhaps the most interesting aspect.
We may not have a beat reporter on it, but I'm very happy that you're taking a look at it, and kudos to you for doing that. That is all the time we have for Colorado Inside Postgame this week. Leave us a comment, tell us what you think. For everyone here at CPT12.org, I'm Dominic Dezzutti. Thanks for watching.